Trivia. This is a three-parter. You got to get all three right to get your bragging points. What was the name of Radio Shack's first personal computer? Anyone? Anyone?
Predated the TRS-80, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's,
No, that's the answer. TRS-80.
yeah.
So that's correct.
Trash 80.
Well, thank you for screwing up the second question. TRS-80. What was its nickname?
Trash it.
Trash 80. Part 3. What was the media that was used to store and load programs on the
Cassette.
Trash 80? Cassette. I believe you could buy, after a while, some sort of outboard disc, something or another, but it came with the cassette.
Big floppies.
Later on, I think.
Later,
The
yeah.
big floppy paper ones.
Yeah,
What was it, 140 kilobytes?
if that, yeah. But yes, the cassette. And I remember
Yeah.
a hand friend of mine had one. You'd sit there and wait 20 minutes to download the program. And those were the days. All righty.
Yeah, I
Well,
helped
yeah.
somebody build one, the computer, the Trash 80,
Uh-huh.
because it came as a kit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Came as a kit. It was a box of capacitors, resistors, a motherboard.
Wow.
You soldered that puppy together.
Wow, that would have not been fun.
That was the first one. And I helped him build that, and then I had a Coco for a while.
Mhm.
And that was also a cassette.
Yeah. So you have to split your bragging points. All righty. Yeah, I already know that. All right, the agenda. Everyone signed in, yes?
Yep.
The wrath of Paul is on me if you don't sign in. I've lost track already. Okay. I sent out the minutes in the agenda last on Sunday, so hopefully everyone got it, reviewed it. Any changes, concerns, anything? Beautiful. Love it. Great. Okay. We'll go through some old business. We'll go through some new business. Paul is going to give us multiple presentations. It's like multi-Paul day. He's going to give us a treasurer's report and an analysis of how the swap meet went. And then, of course, later on, he'll be doing this high-five thing that I already did. You get to deal with me for the member of the month. I would encourage you to consume your alcohol now, because you're on for a bumpy ride. We'll have our announcements. Show and tell is kit and farm radios. And if you have a kit radio that was a farm radio or vice versa, you get extra points. And then the club member sales. All right, so questions, concerns, thoughts? Moving on. All right, old business. We have 2 more members on Facebook. So we're up to 90. That's a very good. So you need to. Oh, okay, never mind. Increase it 2, so that's good. We also mentioned last month, as Paul has said, this will be his last year as treasurer. We are looking for somebody to replace him for 2026. We're saying this now, so 6 months to, if anyone is interested, you can talk to Paul. Gives us some time to get somebody rather than trying to figure it out in April when the election starts. So again, but the beauty is the mine trust is still here. He's not going anywhere. So whoever takes over as treasurer will have full access to his knowledge and his experience, which is a plus. As I mentioned last time, I'm working on a documentation project. This is 100% on me, but I want to try and capture all of the stuff that we do and don't do that's kind of scattered across multiple places and make one document with everything on it. Now, doesn't mean you have to follow it, but just like when we were working on the fall swap meet, I had one document that said the contract was at 9 o'clock. All my advertising said 8. But then Dwight throws another one there. Well, yeah, but the park actually opens at 7. So I want to capture this kind of stuff so we don't have to worry about this later. And at some point, we probably need to revisit the bylaws too, because as I said several times, there's stuff in there that doesn't even apply. We don't do newsletters, but it's in there.
When was the last time somebody read the bylaws?
Oh, well, there's that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did.
Did you read it?
I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Well, I read it too.
And then how much I could throw out the window.
Yeah, I read it too, but it was just kind of I didn't go through with a microphone. So anyway, so my goal is by the end of the year to have something and list everything, specific roles for the officers, what they do, what they don't do, all of these kinds of things, and how to change stuff. So,
Well,
you're killing me, man. You're
whoa,
killing me.
there's a little trip thing here.
Well, don't trip on it.
Try not to.
Swap meet recap, we kind of went over the swap meet, some things, some good things, a couple things we learned. We revisited who won all the contests and the 50-50. So that was just kind of what we did last time. Unfortunately, Mark wasn't here and I forgot my camera, so that one was not recorded. So our video library is short. Oh, you know, can you turn? Stupid me. I'm glad Mark's camera's recording. You would have missed the first part of me. Hang on one second, I apologize. I can't handle multitasking.
Start over.
Yeah, we're going to start over.
Okay.
Okay, today's trivia is. No, Mark's camera looks better and sounds better, and I tried to use it, but we're still kind of dancing with the audio a little bit, so mine is more of a backup. He was smart enough to turn his on. I was not. Okay. New business. This is exciting. This is what we were trying to do. Somebody checked out our videos on the website, YouTube. Doesn't come here, doesn't live here. Just found you guys. Don't have any radio clips down here in South Alabama, so it was fun to sit in, so to speak, on your meeting. That's what we're trying to do, expanding the engagement. We'll never be a member, but if he's a member remotely, we can count him, right? He might have paid dues.
On the other hand, he may come to the swap meet.
Yep.
That is correct. He's exactly correct. And he might come for a meeting sometime. It's been a hot weekend in Atlanta, and you know, so that's beautiful. That was very exciting to see that. Coupled with his article in the paper about Roger Shaw, while it wasn't about us per se, he is us. So this is good stuff. All right. We got us a date, we got us a place. Thank you, Aries, for getting that all squared away. October 11th, Pavilion number 1 at the Rec Center. Reminder, it is outdoors, but it's covered. There is power. We won't do lunch. That's a spring thing, right? Opens 9 to 1 for the public. Vendors can set up at 8, even though the park opens at 7. Thank you, Dwight. But this will also replace the October meeting because it's the same day. So there will be no meeting in October. So just, and I'll keep reminding people, but that's the only change. So it was very good and successful last year, in my opinion. So I think this is a good thing. The technical presentation in July. Thank you to Mr. Paul. You remember last year, I think he was supposed to do it at the swap meet. Something happened and he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But basically, Ryan Harrison is going to do via Zoom his presentation on North Vietnamese and Viet Cong radios. And that was what he was supposed to do last year and couldn't. It will be live via Zoom. I got to keep him down to 45 minutes because we get the free Zoom and it turns off at 45 minutes. But I think I've already talked to him. I think we can make it work.
That is an outstanding presentation, by the way. So
Yes.
we don't want to miss that one.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he's actually a derivative of what he's done in the past.
So you're going to speed talk.
Exactly. So this is exciting because I think this is going to be very interesting and it's something that's been out there for quite a while. We just haven't been able to make it happen. Hopefully we will. Plus, it'll be a Zoom presentation. If that works, that gives us an option potentially for other presenters who are not here to do presentations, to expand the bench a little bit. Connected to that, if you remember me mentioning about trying to get a former colleague of mine to do a presentation on Ford Philco, I actually connected with him. We're having some scheduling problems, so it may be a situation I suggested just record it. It'll kind of be like a YouTube video. We might lose the Q&A, but we can at least still get the content. So that's still out there potentially to do, Ford Philco.
Where is he out of?
He's in Detroit. He's now the Ford archivist. He used to be the Coke, one of the 2 Coke archivists, right? So it might end up being a recorded one, but that's okay. It's a subject that I know people are interested in. That whole Philco thing is kind of an enigma with Ford. Why did they buy it? I know they were involved with the moon missions, and they put radios in the cars, right? So what does that mean? So TBD on that. Anyway, that's sort of the new business. Any questions, thoughts? I know go through these things quickly, but we kind of got things cooking good, and luckily so far no drama. You good? Okay. All right.
All right. I intend to take us in areas that you may not have expected, but that should work out okay. I hope I raised the level a little bit too much. Okay. This is about bringing audio into America after it was possible to do so from a technological standpoint. This is intended to dovetail with some of the stuff that Jacob did. I don't have any quarrel with anything he did. He did a hell of a lot of great research and showed us all stuff that some of it I had never known before. And I want to explore some of the basis of the technical characteristics of audio reproduction, including human factors. Consider some of the psychological and physiological factors in perception of audio. And then to use these learnings largely developed and extended to the public in the 30s to show the adoption of high quality audio reproduction by Americans in their actual homes. Audio Express magazine, if you want to find out what the crazies are doing these days in audio, this is the place to go. And they call it this, Advancing the Evolution of Audio Technology. It's probably the most influential audio activity right now, and articles by Dr. Richard Honeycutt, because now vacuum tubes are considered to be hollow state technology, because transistors are solid state technology. So, so hollow state electronics, see right here. The science. In Jacob's discussion, there was a lot of stuff about these huge horns that they had developed back in the 20s. The science, founded in 1925, the Bell Telephone Laboratories was the science and communications research arm of the Bell system. It was jointly owned by AT&T and Western Electric. And at one point, 15,000 people, 10 Nobel Prizes, 5 Turing Awards, and more than 20,000 patents. And this man, Reed Fisher, was part of that. This is a basic outline of what the corporate structure was, because before they created Bell Labs, all the research and development and high-level engineering was done out in the member companies. But in 1925, they decided to bring the whole thing into one group. And so what they did was they created the Bell Telephone Laboratories. It was 50% owned by Western Electric, 50% owned by AT&T. 25 telephone operating companies all over the United States, 345,000 share owners, and the long lines department, which transferred audio telecommunications between distant points. Given the size of the enterprise, audio activities were sort of a side hustle. And AT&T continuously got itself into trouble and on antitrust grounds over its lifetime because of the side hustles that came out of all the research and development that they had done. This is an example of what you would consider a side hustle. The stuff that Jacob was showing you was audio, but the Bell system started their research because they were interested in the most efficient way to broadcast and transmit voice communications over long distances and have it maximally intelligible. And this is just an example of a Western 405B2 5 kilowatt radio broadcast transmitter, which weighed 10,000 pounds. in 1939, this is one of the things that got him in trouble. And of course, they had started WEAF in New York, which they finally ended up selling to RCA, and that became WNBC. So they were in the broadcasting business. Anyway, that's just an idea. You know, when you talk about a side hustle, you don't normally think about stuff like this.
All those meters to read.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Each one of those three bays was part of the transmitter. One was the driver, one was the power supply, one was the final.
There
Anyway,
was a whole room behind it that contained transformers.
absolutely, the transformers, all the inductors for connecting to the, matching the antenna and all that kind of stuff. Okay. In 1930, WECO set up Electrical Research Products Incorporated to serve the cinema market. They already knew they were going to get divested. They know, because it had happened year over year. Due to an antitrust suit in 1936, they divested ERPI in 1937, which was reincorporated as Altec Service Corporation. In 1927, James Lansing and Ken Decker founded the Lansing Manufacturing Company, separate activity to produce loudspeakers. In 1939, Lansing sold the company to Altec, which merged to the Altec Lansing Company. First amp was the Model 142B. And Altec Lansing was purchased by Ling Temco Vought, and after 1945 began manufacturing of audio electronics for the home hi-fi. One of the sad stories is that James Lansing didn't like the way Altec was being run, so he quit and wanted to go off on his own completely. And the deal was that he couldn't use his own name. That became JBL. And that's why that happened. And sadly, he didn't like the way things were going, and he committed suicide in 1949. Anyway, that's part of the beginning. Now we're going to talk about the Fletcher-Munson curves. Now we're going to talk about human factors. The AT&T and Bell Labs was very interested in how people hear, because if they are going to transmit intelligible speech, they wanted to know how loud it should be, what frequency components should be in it, and so on. So what they did was develop, by testing thousands of individual people, what their hearing was and what it amounts to. These are the Fletcher-Munson curves that came out of research published in 1933. And this stuff has been retested over and over again. And the only difference is they find out now that the upward sweep on these, on the low end, is higher than what the original Fletcher-Munson was. But you can see that when you're right down near the threshold of audibility, in order to have this frequency appear to be the same level as what you hear at this frequency, you have to have this much sound pressure above what you had here. And as you go up in frequency, actually the hearing improves. You need less. And then as you go down lower in back up higher in frequency, you need more and more pre-emphasis in order to detect this as the same level that you heard here. And you can see that as the basic level that you're working for increases, the louder the sound gets, the less preamplification or the less compensation you need. Now, it's not much, but it still follows that same pattern. And those curves are the basis for loudness contour controls in audio systems. The funny thing is, if you think about it, there's a lot of logical questions that arise here. One of them is, if you take the same set of ears into a concert, and then you bring those same set of ears, they're still on your head and they're yours, and you bring them back and you're listening to an audio system at home, your ears had the same compensation need in the concert hall as they did at the house. Why do you need to do this? And the answer is because it sounds better, because that makes it sound more like what you remember you heard. Anyway, they were massively influential in the design of contour factors in audio equipment, and that's one of the reasons that loudness contour compensations are so open to individual interpretation, because everybody's going to hear it differently, and you got a right to hear it the way you want to hear it. And these guys that tell me that this audio system sounds better than that audio system, what my normal statement is, it sounds different, but I don't know if it's better. It may be better to you and not to me, but that's the way it works. Now let's look at a violin playing. This is the spectral components of a violin G5 note. And if you do a Fourier analysis of that waveform, this is what you get. The point is that any irregular waveform can be operated using a Fourier analysis because it is consisted of all of these different sine waves. So you can see you've got a big sine wave at the fundamental, and you've got many, many other sine waves, and all these add up to get the, the waveform that you're working with this. So now let's just look at that. You don't get all of these, everybody doesn't hear these in the same way, because those Fletcher-Munson curves were averages. So everybody's different. If you were going to take the test, the hearing test, you probably wouldn't match those curves exactly. So your hearing is different, and it's going to be. It has to be. And so as you get up in frequency, the way you hear these different overtones, these higher parts, these higher frequency components is going to be different than other people. Maybe better, maybe you hear it better, maybe you hear it worse. But alteration of any of these relationships can have an effect on the perceived sound experienced by a listener. If you've got reflections off the wall, the phase character, some of the stuff that's getting to your ears is going to be traveling further. So the phase characteristics are going to be different from the original. If you sit in the front of a concert hall 3 rows back from the stage, you're going to hear it differently than from the 25th row back, because these frequencies are going to be decaying a lot faster than the fundamentals. So that's why people want to get good seats in front, because they want to get as much of the high frequencies as they can. So amplitude of the frequency of the signal, phase distortion, and lack of faithful reproduction of the original waveform can affect the listener's experience.
They use audio delay boards nowadays.
Say what?
Audio delay.
Audio delay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's
Well, in a big hall.
that's to prevent echo, primarily, yeah. Okay, so keep this in mind. Musical characteristics, what could possibly go wrong? Everything can go wrong. Everything can be different, and it is. And that's why people have different perspectives. Okay. Now, hearing loss with age. Now, this is an interesting one. Now, this was data taken in 1939 at the New York World's Fair on a random basis of people attending the World's Fair. And hearing loss of 3 different age groups. Notice that women consistently lose high frequency more slowly than men. But think about the environment in 1939. Manufacturing, no OSHA, no ear protection. steam engines, foundries, all this stuff where a lot of men worked. So the average loss, I got to believe that that has something to do with it. Think about our own experiences with hearing loss. You all had situations where you've been high intensity situations and you don't want to hear it that loud. So what it amounts to is if you're looking at ages 10 to 19, look at the hearing, actually it improves with frequency. Ages 30 to 39, here's men and here's women, and here's ages 50 to 59, women and men. Now, I think the men would score better today than they did in this, but this is really interesting information because I don't know how many of you people in here have tinnitus. Most of us are older people and we've had time to develop it. Now, when they give you a hearing test, like they put 10,000 cycles in your ear and they raise it and they say, tell me as soon as you hear it. The fact that the threshold of when you hear it is going to be delayed by the tinnitus. It doesn't mean you can't hear 10 kilohertz. It means that you just need more of it to be able to perceive it. And that's my perception as well in the audio work that I've done. I've got lots of hearing loss, but I can still hear an awful lot of the stuff I remember if I crank it up a little bit more. And so when you have a real permanent hearing loss of many, many dB, that's one thing, and you need a hearing aid. When a lot of people, and this ear doesn't score anywhere near as well as this one. And I don't believe what they're telling me because I can go home and play stuff and run tones at frequencies they say I can't hear anything and I can hear it just fine. So all of us are different depending upon our ages, whether male, female, whatever, how much. The story in World War II was the B-25. The pilot the propellers from the engines were only this far from the guy's ear. I mean, he sat right next to the airplane and the propeller was only a few inches short of it. So the pilot was always deaf in the left ear and the co-pilot was always deaf in the right ear. So that's the way this works. All right. The Fletcher-Munson curves are averages of many results. The harmonic structure of music and any other sound reproduction, hearing the differences can result in variations between individuals in your perception. Aging causes major loss of hearing, especially at higher frequencies. We don't all lose hearing at the same rate, the same frequency patterns. Add preferences and biases and you get endless debate about what sounds better or worse, good or bad. So what it boils down to is you're free. You're entitled to hear what you want to hear, to make it sound the way you want it to sound, and to enjoy it the way you like to enjoy it, because everybody's going to be different. The only thing you do is when we go to the concert hall, Atlanta Symphony or something, we hear a lot different depending upon where we sit. And even in that, you can see, even though we got the same ears, we can have different perceptions depending upon where we are. Now, the audio craze, this is another track. What I've done here is give you some insight into the hearing perspectives, the human perspectives. Now, the term high fidelity has been used as early as the Zenith Stratosphere in 1935. They had 8 45s in push-pull parallel in the output. They claimed 50 watts, and I don't believe it. And anyway, the 2A3 in 1933 was termed by Vacuum Tube Valley and Kittleson as the mother of high fidelity. It was the last industry offering of a large power triode exception the Western Electric 300A and B in the triode output sweepstakes. And I don't count these because these are transmitting tubes. The 6L6 was a major advance. Zenith started using them in 1937 and then retreated to the 6V6. Actually, the 6L6 came out before the 6V6 did. Not far, I was a couple of months. RCA began pilot production of the GC in October '59. The closest thing to the British KT-66 of 1937 was the domestic 6CA7 of 1952. And there's a lot of surprise about that, and that's a topic for another whole discussion. So what many identify as the kickoff of the high-fidelity audio craze was the Williamson amplifier from Britain.
Before you go on, I have a question for you about the 6L6 versus the 6V6. Is there any kind of characteristic advantage to the 6V6?
Yeah, it's just smaller.
I know it's physically smaller, lower power, but I mean, why would they retreat and go back to the 6V6 when they could have been using the 6L6?
Well, when they did the 6L6, they were looking for power.
Right.
They wanted
Right.
25 watts
Sure.
out of a pair of tubes.
Yeah.
But Zenith and a whole bunch of other companies were using, if you look at a 1937 Zenith, it'll have 6L6s but you don't need it. You had to bias it off. What they needed was a smaller tube, because 10 watts out of a radio, even a big console, was all you needed. And so they needed a lower power tube, but with the same good characteristics within its dissipation ratings as a 6L6. And by the way, the beam plates were invented in Europe, not by RCA. And so that's another thing. What many identify as kickoff was Milton Williamson amplifier from Britain. I don't want to go through an awful lot of detail here, but I want to try something on you. This is the schematic of the original Williamson amplifier. And one of the things that they did was they took a feedback loop and they brought some of that energy back into the input. The idea is if there's distortion in the output, this negative feedback is going to correct the amplifier and make it better. And it does.
So it's regenerative,
It's a
like a regenerative receiver. Like a regenerative receiver.
Well, it's
It's negative regeneration. It's degeneration.
Okay.
Yeah, what it's gonna do is limit the input.
Okay, and so what it amounts to, though, is that this output isn't connected to a resistor. You test the amps with resistors on them. But when you listen to them, you put loudspeakers on them. And when a loudspeaker is working, the cone is moving. And when the cone is moving, it's also an EMF generator. And some of that's going to be spurious. Some of it isn't going to be related to what the amplifier is doing. So this feedback circuit is going to be getting information that's related to the loudspeaker, not the amplifier. And then the amplifier then is going to have to deal with it and try to figure out how to fix it, which it can't do. And so when you talk about how particular amplifiers sound against particular speakers, it's different in a lot of ways, in many ways, because it's a factor in the matching characteristics between the amplifier and what its feedback characterizations are to the loudspeaker you're using. And that's one of the reasons, and I'll get into this a little bit better, is the speakers that I have in my living room are intended to not have any spurious motion in the cone. And that's why you can put all kinds of different amplifiers on there and they all sound the same. Okay.
Wouldn't it seem like that feedback is actually a summation of what goes on in the amplifier plus or minus the speaker degeneration?
Yeah, but by the time it has to do with the speaker degeneration or the speaker
There's a phase
spurious stuff, there's phase problems all the way through the amplifiers. that's one of the reasons that a lot of people like single-ended and amplifiers with no feedback, because they don't have that problem, but they also don't have the damping factor on a loudspeaker. Okay,
The feedback was very important for Class B amplifiers and push-pull, but you're saying these were actually biased for Class A.
these actually, the original Williamson is a triode. These are KT66s, and they're run as triodes.
Yeah,
So they got,
you're saying up there that they're biased for Class A. That same circuit could be biased for Class B, but you would have greater distortion.
Grady, I thought
Yeah.
that a push-pull circuit had to be Class B, could not be Class A.
I don't think
Because it's only
yes.
conducting on half the cycle.
no,
Yeah, but
well,
the other one's swinging the other way, so, I mean,
Well-
as long as they're fed out of phase,
Class A is
it still works.
swinging both sides in conduction all the time. Class AB1
Right,
is swinging, but part of one side is out of conduction part of the cycle. Class AB2 is part of it's out of conduction, and the other part is drawing grid current.
right. But if it's a true push-pull, like the last stages are,
Yeah.
it has to be Class B.
Class B is generally considered to be when
Conducting
the
half
two
the
are
cycle.
biased at zero.
Right.
Yeah,
So there's
right.
no
Because
conduction.
it's only gonna conduct at half cycle because it's push-pull.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying, if they're still out of phase, it's okay, it's just that you have negative swing on one, when the other one on the other side of the transformer is going positive. So it still works, it's just that you don't get as much output of it, because the second tube stage, you'll see that the bottom side of it's cathode follower feeding the bottom half, and the
Yeah.
top half is
I don't
off the plate, so that's where they're getting their phase inversion for the two halves of the amplifier.
want to get too hung up on that. We could go with, this one has 20 dB, this circuit has 20 dB of feedback.
Okay.
All right, this is a reconstruction of the Williamson amplifier that was post-war. I mean, this is 1949, but this is what it looked like post-war. So they were doing that kind of stuff before we did in this country. Early U.S. audio amplifiers, the Brook 10C, push-pull 2A3s, 10 watts. And this is a Heathkit brand Williamson type. And the Brits get all out of joint if you call it a Williamson amplifier, and it's got ultralinear in it, and it's got some other deviations. Unless you beat that exact circuit, it's not a Williamson. And they'll wave the flag at you over it. But I'm sure you're familiar with this early Heathkit Williamson type amp, and that's one of the WAP2 preamps that went with it. And here's a Western Electric 91A, and Jacob goes, he's maybe frothing at the mouth whenever you talk to about this amp. It's a single-ended thing, and it was used to drive smaller theaters, speakers in theaters. This was 1933, and it puts out 8 watts, and for that it was good with high efficiency speakers, and it also was used as a driver for higher power units because Altec and Western, they had modular construction for these assemblies. And I'm still working with Jacob and Early Bender up in Virginia on sorting out some of the issues with this, with testing these tubes. These are 310As, which is another whole story. I don't want to get into that. And this was a Macintosh 50W, 1949, 50 watts of power from 2 6L6s and push-pull. They had a unique design output transformer and access to high quality audio sources. This happened with open reel tape and LP phonograph records. And once we had a higher level of input of program material to use, you know, what could you do with AM radio? That was about all you had. But once these more higher fidelity sources became available, the whole thing got kicked off. And by the way, I don't know if any of you remember the London FFRR discs, full frequency range recording. They had it during World War II, and it was developed to train submariners on how to listen to them, train on sonar, because the only way you could send somebody and train them on sonar was put them in a submarine and go. But if you could record with higher fidelity the way the things sound, they could use it. Yes, read.
What's the definition of high fidelity?
There is none. It's a word.
Then why are we talking about it?
Because it's one of those terms that is undefined. Everybody thinks they know what it means, and nobody knows what it means. Yeah.
Or the distortion meter.
Yes.
If you get a sine wave into the audio amplifier, and you can measure the distortion on the sine wave coming out. So that should set up some kind of definition for high fidelity.
Well, practically every time you do something like that, if you make a comparison like that, you get into trouble. And I'll tell you, I'm now talking about, and I will briefly talk about the speakers in my house and the ones we developed years ago. But I've had amplifiers in there that have distortion ratings at 1 watt of virtually unmeasurable levels, and ones that are 1 or 2% distortion. And you cannot hear the difference between them. And the point is that there's an awful lot more emphasis done on the percent for a long time. So there's no real answer to your question. It's undefined, and we can be frustrated about the fact that you can't define it, but it's not subject to any definition. The first time I've seen high fidelity is on that switch on the back of a Stratosphere Zenith receiver in 1935. That's the first time I've been able to see the term, and it meant something different then than it does now. Anyway, once we had access to high quality audio sources, the avalanche started. This is the turntable in my audio system, and it's a Technics SL1200. I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I lived in Virginia, a guy in New York was getting rid of all his silver stuff because he was changing over to all black. I bought that turntable for $400. At that time, if you were going to buy a new one of these, it was $1,200. Now, in about 2012, they discontinued this thing. But now they've brought it back. And Panasonic is selling that turntable today for $4,000. And I didn't buy it for that reason, you know. I just wanted a good turntable, and an SL1200 is about as good as you can get without going insane. Read.
Does the turntable have a synchronous motor or just a belt drive?
It is a Hall effect drive on the rim of the platter. There's a coil, there's a series of windings that go all the way around under the deck here, and there's a magnetic field set up that goes around and around and around, and the magnetic detector on the lip of the turntable follows that magnetic pattern. And that's why you can, disc jockeys use these things everywhere, because you hold the turntable, you hold the platter and let it go, and it's virtually instantly up to speed.
So that basically it is a synchronous motor.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it is.
Direct drive servos is what they're actually called, I believe, or Technics as their.
In automotive terms, you sort of call it the Hall effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, anyway, the LP disc in 1948, open reel tape was the first time we really had stereo. stereo disc in 1957, CD in 82, and of course now there's a recent resurgence for vinyl records. This was the MPEG 600 of 1954. It was half track, and it was based on research recovered from Germany, the magnetophone, because the Germans had tape recording in 1942. They were already at 40 hertz to 15 kilohertz, and 45 dB of signal-to-noise ratio. This is a MPEX 4460, 1963, full stereo deck.
That mono MPEG is called a record player, a record player, a record player. That's the term for it. Because it doesn't record, it only plays.
No, that MPEX, it would record.
Not that model, but I do a lot of MPEG stuff.
Yeah.
For the guy that's in charge of MPEG stuff.
Yeah.
And I did one that's just the player only.
Okay, this
And
is,
it's called a record player
okay.
because it's playing record. I like a record player. It's kind
All right.
Hence the word.
Now, what happened was as soon as you get all this stuff, everybody wants them to get louder, so you need more power. Hafler and Herb Kuros from Acrosound in 1949 set up a company to manufacture high-quality transformers, Acrosound. You didn't bring your...
The van's full of scrap, so I didn't want to bang anything up I cared about.
Okay. They patented the ultralinear circuit in 1952. Ed Blumlein, European, patented that in 1937. And it just shows you that those guys over there, well, anyway, Hafler and Laurent formed Dynaco in 55. Ultralinear output was combined with the original Williamson circuit, then modified 6A and 8 originally in 7199, if you're familiar with that architecture. Long-term disdain on the part of many for transistorized high-fidelity audio equipment, which is another whole story. This is Acrosound TO350. I did not find TO360, Sam, anywhere that I could see it, but the 350 is supposed to be for ultralinear 100 watt. This is a photo of an Acrosound ultralinear 2, a very great amplifier. Sam has brought 2 of those up and we've put them on the speakers and they sound great. Anyway, it also has a problem though, that the main circuit card gets hot and with age goes bad, and so you got to replace it. But you can
It's on fire.
I was trying not to go too far with this. Yes.
Well, with transistors, you don't need an output transformer.
Well, that's another whole
You
story.
can voice call directly.
Yes, that's right.
Or some of them capacitive couplers.
Some are.
Like
I'm not going to get into that at this point because my system is all solid state.
Does it have an
Heretic.
output transformer?
Boo! Where did that come from? All right, new businesses created, many new companies, Brook, Dynaco, Fisher 8. Dynaco estimated 125,000 Mark IIIs sold and 400,000 stereo 70s. That's a Perry EL 34 is putting out 35 watts per channel. That's the amp we sold to, that was donated to the club that Jacob bought. Fisher Radio estimated 100,500 Cs. Harman Kardon. Altec Lansing. Altec Lansing, when it got loose, it bought the Peerless Transformer Company, and so Altec and Peerless were considered to be peerless. Anyway, H.H. Scott, Marantz, McIntosh, Bogan, Heath, estimated over 30,000 W5Ms made. High fidelity amps created new demand for specialized tubes, plate dissipations. I'm not going to go through all this. 6CA7 is a beam power pentode, a beam power tube, not a pentode. The US version of the 6CA7. 6550 Tungsol There's one back there. That's my show and tell. 6L6 GCRCA, 30 watts, 1959. But in 1959, it still didn't have the GM or the plate voltage capability of a KT66, which was designed in 1937. Anyway, the 8417 is a real moose. You can get 100 watts out of a pair of those, which the Fisher 1000 amp had those in it, and that would put easy 95 watts out on the bench. KT6 Genelex Marconi Osram valve. This was the genesis of the 6L6, as well as the KT66. The EL34, which everybody says is Mullard, was designed and built by Philips, who owned Mullard. The point is that Philips turned all the manufacture of those tubes back to Blackburn, and so everybody thinks the EL34 is a British tube, and it ain't. It was just made there. KT88 Genelex, another MOV. Now you got the CC383 12AX7, all lots of different ones, GZ34 rectifier. So you got all those tubes, and this is the kings of the British power tubes, the KT66 and the KT88. Marantz 8B, there was an 8. This is an 8B, and this is a slightly better unit. They had refined the circuit. This will put out 40 watts a channel. I've restored a number of these, and it's a fantastic amplifier. It's probably the best sounding solid vacuum tube amplifier I've worked on. The Altec 340A was first introduced in 1955, and it was the first commercial use of the 6550 by Tungsol, which is over there. Okay. But wait, there's more.
Stop the recording?
No, that's later.
Okay.
This is from a tour of the Rossville plant by the guy from the magazine. Anyway, and this is Charles Whitener. This is the 300B Reborn, and many of its measurements of many of the tubes do not match the Western Electric spec. And that will serve to be, and that, no.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to that if we have time when we're done here. Okay. It's right up in Rossville, and some things about it are very mysterious. Okay, more yet, the guitar guys. Now, if you're interested in vacuum tubes, the people that are keeping the whole business alive worldwide are the guitar guys and the hi-fi audio nuts. Nobody's making any money building 6D6s and 6A8s. They are all made, and what we got is what we're going to have. Electronic amplification for guitar players has been a major issue since the 1930s. The guitar craze, many performers prefer vacuum tube sound. They like to overdrive the vacuum tubes, and they like the way the distortion sounds. Transistors don't sound like that. Recent lookup identified 92 active guitar amplifier manufacturers in the world. This is a Fender Deluxe 53, one of the early ones, although these guys, Fender got started with a guy back in the 30s. And there's a Bassman amp head with a 15-inch speaker cabinet. This is 4 Electro Harmonics KT88 power tubes inside a Trainer YBA 200 guitar amplifier, and there's 4 of these things, and you can imagine the BTUs coming off of that. There's a Mesa Boogie, and both classes of amps require many of the same tube types. New old stock tubes are considered most desirable by the audio enthusiasts. available from many sources, Russia, China, Slovak Republic, and recent military activity in Europe has made access to tubes made in Russia difficult. And there's a KT-120 back there on that, and that's a part of a pair that I got in 2018, and you're not supposed to get Russian tubes. I have some friends that I've maintained tube testers for who are in the tube business. I ordered a new set of KT-120s, and he had them there very quickly, and they were made in 2023 in Saratov. I don't know how it happened, but you can get the Russian tubes. Status of the tube supply. New Sensor is the owner of these brands. And this is a guy who lives in Long Island, who runs all this. These are Premier Cheese, Chinese tube brands. JJ is an independent manufacturer in the Slovak Republic, successor to a company called Tesla. Shugwang, and these are called Shugis, just returned after a 5+ year hiatus due to a fire, and they're of questionable quality. This is the KT-120. I've worked with these things. This is one of those milestone designs. You can get 100 watts out of a pair of these, but you have to have a power supply and an output transformer to match to be able to handle it. I could tell you lots of stories about that. Let's not go there. Okay. The problem is, we've been talking about the electronics. What about the speakers? Practical home speakers. Peter Jensen invented the first moving coil loudspeaker in 1915, and he was working with another guy, and that's where the term Magnavox came from. Okay. Western Electric was producing loud-speaking telephones. There's a picture of one. GE's Kellogg and Rice patented the moving coil cone loudspeaker. Klipsch pioneered development of a folded horn that required placement a quarter of a wavelength out from the corner because the firing of the audio was backwards, and it was to reflect off the walls and come back. Read.
What a wavelength and what frequency?
That's what the publicity on the speaker said, and I had the same question, and I don't know the answer to that.
41 kilohertz.
I don't know, because there's a lot of different frequencies involved in audio. The Shearer horn in 1935 was a collaboration of MGM Studios, Lansing, RCA, Western Electric. One of the things Jacob was talking about was the conflict and the competition between RCA and Western Electric. But they did a lot of working together, too. All right. This is the A4 for theaters in 1946. Now you can imagine a movie theater with 3 of these across. I mean, you could blow people out of the front row with this. And it's based on a pre-war Western design, hardly a prototype for home systems, but it was influential. Okay, post-war development. This is the Altec, the famous Altec 604E loudspeaker. I was an Altec dealer for a while. This is part of my sales literature. This was an early production Klipsch horn using a mid-high frequency horn mounted on top of a folded bass horn. Large speakers of interest. The Jensen Imperial prototype for the Doremus version. This is the cabinet, the basis for the cabinet that's in my living room, and the one that Sam's trying to get built. And there's a lot of things about it that the architecture of the cabinet we immediately realized it was going to be really great. We built one to the exact dimensions and drawings that's here. And it wasn't worth a damn. Yes? Read.
Have you ever owned an electrostatic speaker?
No.
I've heard them.
Yeah.
Magneplaners and all that.
Yeah.
They're great if you're in the right position.
And not only that, you gotta put so much power to them.
Well, that's another whole track, and I'm not gonna go there in this. This is
100 watts to drive the thing.
the theory here is this is a backloaded folded horn. Here's the loudspeaker. It's mounted in a chamber with a port, and it feeds the throat of an exponentially increasing cross-sectional area that then comes out to ports and comes out into the room. The way they had it upside down as far as we're concerned. You get when you get 3 dB when you put it in the corner, you get another 3 dB when you turn it right side up and you're working on the floor because the ceiling is still way up there. So we built like 3 cabinets a season for 3 years. And John DeRemus, he was my mentor and the guy I worked for when I graduated from college, until we got a Hypex curve built into the expansion characteristic that blew the world away compared to what we had seen before. Yes, Reed?
I read that the bass reflex cabinet was an effort to cancel out the resonant frequency of the speaker. You know, a speaker has a resonant frequency around 100 hertz. So
well, depends on the speaker. Some of them are down to 30, 35 hertz.
Anyway, that cabinet was an effort to cancel out the increased response that you would have with the resonant frequency.
Well, the advantage to this is that it's an acoustic transformer, and it actually loads the loudspeaker to the air impedance out in the world, so it virtually eliminates and kills the resonance of the speaker. And that's one of the things that this did. And we were absolutely astonished by the difference between the other formulations we had tried. Here you can see the port, here's the loudspeaker enclosure, here's the port, and here's the expansion in area as you move away from the loudspeaker chamber. And this port goes all the way, both sides, in the front and along the sides. And this thing, we measured a flare cutoff of 26 hertz with this thing. And you can move your pants legs with it. Anyway, the point is that the last one of these we built in his basement in 1958 is the left-hand speaker cabinet in my living room. Later on, we had another one built, and that's the one that's on the right side. Yeah.
Does the specific type of wood make a big difference?
We don't know that. It's all made out of 3/8 inch plywood.
Got it. Okay.
And 4 by 8 foot sheets. And by the time you get done building one of these, you've got a pile of sawdust. We've got cut sheets that will let you end up with a couple of strips of wood and a pile of sawdust when you're done. And you want to move these things around, you need a couple of people. Now this is the Electro Voice Patrician, which was much larger than this in every dimension, had bigger speakers and everything. We took one of these with a 604C coaxial speaker down to this guy's studio and compared it to the Patrician, and it made the Patrician look sick. And that was our victory. Anyway, big speakers take lots of space, and here is a piece of publicity from Altec back in the 60s, because you know the whole thing is big speakers sound better than little speakers, and you gotta. I think it was a misplaced set of publicity for Altec because I think it backfired. Anyway. Edgar Vilcher described a compact acoustical suspension loudspeaker in '54, and this came out with him and Henry Kloss as the AR1, and then it followed quickly by the 2 and 3, which had improved high frequency response, but it had lower efficiency, required increased driving power. And this is for a long time, this was the dominant speaker in the industry because people just didn't have room for all these great big loudspeakers. Again, Reed.
You're familiar with a Bose speaker, which is a lot of small speakers in parallel.
That's the acoustic mess.
Now, this is the Bose 901.
Yep.
Produced from 1968 to 2016. Ported enclosure with 8 small drivers directed rearward and 1 forward. And whether you like this or not, that's what it looks like. You have got to have a room, though, to use it in. You've got to have it spaced a specific distance out of the corner because the 8 speakers fire backwards and rely on reflections. You have to use stands. I've got a couple of these tulip stands.
And an equalizer.
And an equalizer.
Yeah,
And if you can hang them from the ceiling, but if you do, you got to hang them in the exact right distance from the ceiling. The point is, this could be done in here. There are all kinds of, when Jacob did a demonstration of what something sounds like in an acoustic, in a room like this, it just doesn't work. But this room has the corners. I have a couple of Bose 5s and the equalizer. If I can get that going and satisfied, and I've got a couple of tulip stands, we may be able to do a demo in here of the Bose 901s. I got to get permission from them to let us do it. But we could do that in a subsequent thing. And one of the things you would be amazed at is how, if you've never heard them, they were discontinued in 2016 from production.
I've reconed a lot of those things.
And so people love them or hate them, but they are unbelievable. When you look at these 2 little speakers and you hear what you're hearing, you just can't believe it. Okay, that's about the end of that. We could have gone on and on about it. To trigger any of this stuff, you can talk about this forever. But number one, I was trying to point out that everybody hears things differently, and you got a right to hear it the way you want it. And you don't have to defend it. It's like, that's just us. I've been involved in this. I grew up through all this. In these years when these amplifiers were being built, I built them myself out of 1625s. You could buy them for 25 cents. And build a 40-watt ultralinear amplifier out of it.
To tell you the difference in hearing, since a lot of guitar players, getting back to guitar players, like you're talking about with the tube stuff, they can hear the difference in between 112X7 and another.
I know they can, and
I can't.
I can't either. Yeah, Reed.
Was your father ever in the audio business?
No, my relationship with my father in the audio business was when he would go on the air, W2ZVW, and blah, coming out of my speakers. The audio system was decoded, was rectified. So half of the time I was telling him, "Damn it, I can't." Anyway, we are dangerously close to curfew here, so I think I got to quit. But I appreciate your attention, and we could go on and talk about all this stuff for as long as you want. But after all that, all of my audio stuff is solid state. Hafler DH220 with a distortion that you can't measure, and lots of power. And for those of you who have heard it, I've just had an experience with one of the guys from the audio club in Atlanta who came up to my place and he wanted to hear the audio system, and I wouldn't let him see what it was. And he liked it. He was astonished, and when I told him it was all transistors, he about had a cow. So
Thank you, that was very good. And I apologize because I kind of derailed the whole time thing, so I warned you. Let's go ahead and do our show and tell while we have some time. So whoever owns this first radio.
Oh, that's mine.
That's yours, okay.
I do believe.
So the theme was farm and kit radios.
I'll put it upside down. My audio's kind of upside down.
Converted audio?
Yeah, okay. And this one is actually a kit radio and falls in the same category as farm.
So he gets 2 points.
Points. And I've got extra tubes and everything else, extra parts. You could put it together, make it in 3 tubes or 4 tubes or 2 tubes. Back in the day, and this is your off on, use 6 volts, they use 45 volts and 90 volts. And I've got a diagram in here, a handy diagram that I did years ago. This one I found in the streets of Chicago a long time ago. People would throw stuff away, put it by the sidewalk, and I would pick it up. I had it on display when I worked at a TV repair store in south side of Chicago once, playing. I think I had showed it to this group at one time, a long time ago, playing. So it does work. It is regenerative. And here it's got your tickler coil and all that. And diagrams in there. And it's got some of the early tubes in it that are the vacuums pulled from the top. Those are 201s, I do believe. Yeah. They're 3U 201s, whatever. And so here's your filament voltage for each stage, or you can plug your earphone into here and tune your stages. So these are basically, these two over here are amplification. This is your oscillator, whatever, detector. And it receives pretty good, even with the built-in antenna that I did years ago, which is right now disconnected. So I do have an earphone in here for listening.
What year?
Around 1920s. I'm not positive, and I don't know who made it. Some people, I thought at one time it was a Kellogg. That's what I put on there, kit radio from Kellogg. But some things say it might be a Bremen Tully. I'm not positive. There was a lot of hardware stores and people, home hobbyists that made stuff back in this period of time. Made a cabinet and made radios. Everybody made radios back in the day. Some men, who knows who made it. Not positive. That's it.
Okay. Next up, is it the book or the antenna?
Oh, those are not mine.
She's got the next one.
Look, it really blows over on that table.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
1947 book from the Army about, probably a high school level kid goes into the Army, they're going to teach them about radio. So if you want to learn about radio at high school level, I'll put this book over on the table. Anybody wants to take it home with them and transfer it over there.
Next one, you? The antenna?
Me.
40-meter dipole.
In 1930, every radio needed an outdoor antenna. And this is an antenna kit made by Burnback in New York City. And instruction book by, they were in cahoots with Fillmore, according to the instructions. So everything you had to have to put up your outdoor antenna even talks about how to connect to a ground. Be sure that your ground was a water pipe and not a gas pipe.
If you're gonna connect to a pipe.
little television? I know that can't be farm kit.
I brought that recent acquisition. I brought it, I didn't know what the topic was for today, so I just brought it hoping to, get some information. Somebody's seen one before, or as Roger probably got two of them.
Didn't you have that at the swap meet? Yeah, Roger had one.
One like that, yeah, it's a slide projector and a radio. You can slide in there.
But he had his there. I had to look at it going, is that really a TV? Oh, that was a slide.
No. It's on or off?
A true radio kit. Whose is that?
That was from high school electronics shop. We had the option of either getting the Packard Bell kit or the more common Graymark kit. I got that just because it came with a cabinet. My actual radio in its box is at home. I can't find it. But that is something I got at an estate sale or maybe here at the club. It's missing the cabinet and the tuning knob, but that's the manual that I built my original one with. It's got the date on it of 1969 when I was 2 years old. And that's about it.
Next one, night radio.
Yep. It's a 1971 Night Kit radio. The model is KG311. I found it in the 1970 Allied catalog. I checked all the resistors and replaced all those Japanese white oil caps on it. It does work. It doesn't work very well. It does work. Allied was purchased by Radio Shack in 1970, just about the same time. And then became the Allied Radio Shack stores. And in 1973, Radio Shack sold the rest of the Allied stores off and went right back to Radio Shack.
This next one, I know that's yours.
Yeah, and I just thought I'd bring along a couple of these tubes. The first one is a Russian KUT 120, 60 watt plate dissipation. The second one is Tungsol, that's an American tube, originally brought out in 1955. That's a 42 watt plate dissipation. And there is a 300B built in Rossville, and that is a 60 watt, I think it's 60 watts plate dissipation. And there may be another time and place to talk about those other details. Anyway, I thought it would be interesting. I thought it would be interesting to see some of those tubes.
Was the Western Electric 300B any better than the 6L6?
That's like,
Yeah.
our peach is better than apples. I mean,
Just because it's Western Electric doesn't mean that it's better.
well, it's a triode, and that makes it in a different class. And it's the biggest non-transmitting triode ever built. And they're being built all over the world still, but they don't look like that, and they don't behave like that. This is supposed to be a clone of the Western Electric, and there are some areas in which it's not. But
What's the 300B? So I think if they're like $1,200 or more than that.
say what?
What's the
The
price
price.
tag on 300B right now?
A pair of them, $1,500.
Okay. And the 6L6?
A good GC,
Yeah.
85, 90.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
But the Western
Is
Electric,
it better? Who knows?
Randy, the Western Electric will provide free shipping at $1,500.
Oh, yeah, really cool.
That'll wait days.
Yeah.
And are you gonna hear the
Case is
difference?
actually $14.99. The tubes are 50 cents each.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
You're not gonna hear the difference.
That's my farm radio, 32 volts. It's a 32 volt farm radio, plays very well. The interesting thing I think is if you hold up the cord, find the line cord in the back there, not the power supply, but the radio's line cord, the radios, the old antique.
Oh, it's right, okay.
Yeah, it's stuck inside there. And it's a non-polarized two-prong plug. So those 32 volters were DC. So you say, well, what happens if I plug it in wrong? Well, absolutely nothing happens if you plug it in wrong because it's backwards and it does no harm whatsoever. It just doesn't play. But if you turn it around the other way, now you've got a positive potential on the plates and it plays rather well. So I built a power supply for it and I cheated. I have a solid state power supply, 2 converters that put out the 32 volts. So, but it plays really well.
Bad cooling fan.
And what in the circuit made the thing work on 32 volts? Any unusual circuit? Have you looked at that?
Actually, yeah. There's nothing really unique except the output. In order to get a decent output at 32 volts, they have a pair of 48s running in parallel. Not push-pull, but parallel. So it puts out fairly good audio. Yeah.
That what 48 was designed for 32 volts?
Yeah.
It was designed for lower voltage.
Huh.
And
So,
the reason for
it works.
32 volts was the fact that, like when I was in Canada, we had 32 volts and an own generator and batteries and all that.
Right. And I've never been able to figure out why. I've done a web search on the thing, try to figure out why did they choose 32 volts, because it's not a convenient battery voltage. If you start stacking 2.2 volt batteries together, it doesn't come out 32
Metric
volts.
voltage.
Maybe it's, yeah, there we go. We're gonna go with that.
I have a theory.
Europeans, you could even
I-
buy 32 volt light bulbs in Canada.
Yeah.
I have a theory, a mathematical theory. The number 2 raised to the 5th power is 32. So clearly, that's why we have 32 volts. My grandfather had a 32 volt system in his farm. So I'm familiar with that system. And when they changed to 120 volts, when the pole pig was finally installed, I wonder what kind of wiring changes would be needed in the house. That's right. They just unscrewed the 32 volt bulbs, screwed in the 120 volt bulbs, and everything works.
All right, everybody, those are great. We are running a little late, and again, I'm the big problem with that. Reminder, next month, July 12th, 9 a.m., Show and Tell's military radios, which connects to the theme of Brian's presentation. And if you want to buy some stuff, but we do got to be out of here pretty quickly, so run the table there. And member of the month next week, Ben Ward, so we get to get radio thinking from across the sea. Thank you.